Welcome to this explainer. Today we're unpacking a really fascinating, honestly kind of massive evolution that's happening right in the beating heart of modern organizations. We're going to take a deep dive into the intense, rapidly shifting, and sometimes totally overwhelming world of the modern middle manager. If you're sitting there thinking being a line manager is just, passing down orders from the big bosses and reporting numbers up from the bottom, think again. The role has fundamentally transformed, and the stakes for getting it right have literally never been higher.
Which brings up a pretty serious question, one that researchers and organizational experts are starting to ask out loud. Are we expecting our middle managers to do the impossible? We're piling these immense burdens right onto the shoulders of line managers, but are these expectations even realistic? Or are we, frankly, setting them up for failure by asking them to be experts in fields they were never actually trained for?
So, Part 1, the new middle manager from bureaucrat to HR hub. Let's dive straight into this and look at exactly what companies are now demanding from middle management.
Historically, there was a super clear division of labor, right? The old way relied heavily on a centralized HR authority. If you had a people issue, say a training need or a performance problem, you just sent it over to human resources. They were the specialists. But the new way? There's been this huge shift toward line managers being centrally involved in managing people issues themselves. Today, the line manager is basically expected to take direct ownership of HR tasks, right there on the front lines.
Now you might be wondering, why make this shift at all? Well, it isn't just to save a few bucks in the HR department. It actually brilliantly illustrates a core strategy. By pushing these responsibilities down to the middle managers, organizations gain the clear advantage of more ownership. It gives companies a way better chance of blending day-to-day people issues directly with overarching business strategies. When the person managing the business goals is the exact same person managing the people goals, that alignment can be incredibly powerful.
That brings us to Part 2, a formula for mediocrity, the agitation.
Look, any massive shift in job responsibilities is going to come with friction, and we really need to look at the agitation happening on the ground right now. Research actually backs up some deep concerns about whether the environments line managers operate in even allow them to do a good job with people management. Let's fire off some of these real worries. First off, is it even realistic to expect a line manager to just become a competent HR pro overnight? Second, these managers are under immense pressure to hit short-term targets. That really doesn't leave them room to take a long-term strategic view of their people. Third, years of downsizing and delayering, that's left the remaining managers incredibly busy just keeping the lights on. Fourth, trade unions and professional associations often push back on this dispersed responsibility. From their view, it's way easier to just deal with a single, centralized HR authority. And finally, managers often totally lack the incentive to take on these formal HR activities. They rarely see a direct bump in their pay, their grade, or their marketability outside the company for doing all this extra HR work. Honestly, it's enough to make any manager want to hide under their desk.
So, the crucial point is perfectly captured in this quote straight from the source material. Handled badly. This could be a formula for mediocrity. Forcing managers to take on highly specialized tasks without giving them the right time, the right training, or the structural support, that can drastically backfire. And by the way, the sources note this exact same concern could apply to other specialized areas getting dumped on middle managers too, like information management.
All right, Part 3, structures and strategic success. The ecosystem. This shifts our focus to the actual environment the manager operates in.
Just take a second to absorb this powerful statement. It's basically saying that even the most talented, hardest-working middle manager in the world will fail if they're trapped in an outdated organizational framework. As circumstances change, organizations absolutely have to change their processes and relationships to match. You just can't execute a modern, agile strategy using a structure built for a 1950s assembly line.
To actually empower these managers to handle their new responsibilities, companies often turn to decentralization. And this isn't just a corporate buzzword, it's literally defined as decision-making freedom. It's the actual transfer of authority, responsibility, and decision-making rights from the very top of the organizational structure straight down to the bottom. If you want a line manager to handle complex HR issues, you have to give them the authority to actually make decisions, rather than just handing them a pile of extra administrative chores.
But decentralization looks really different depending on how your organization is actually built. We've got 5 basic structural types to consider. A functional structure emphasizes specialism. Think of your classic marketing or production silos. A multi-divisional structure focuses on distinct business units. Then you have matrix, transnational, and project structures, which try to mix these dimensions more evenly, balancing things like product and geography. Now, none of these is a magic, universal solution. The right structure depends entirely on the specific challenges the organization is facing. But for the middle manager,
These structures completely dictate the rules of the game.
What's really fascinating here is that structural charts do way more than just show who the boss is. Formal reporting lines literally shape patterns of communication and knowledge exchange. As the source material points out, people tend not to talk much to folks who are much higher or much lower in the hierarchy, or people in entirely different parts of the organization. These structures essentially create invisible walls, silos, that the middle manager has to somehow navigate every single day just to get things done.
And part of navigating that structure is making some tough strategic choices about resources. For instance, should certain HR issues like recruitment or training reside internally with the managers, or should they be bought in from external specialist suppliers like consultants? Internal management means the people solving the problem are intimately familiar with the detailed circumstances of the company. But external agencies, they bring the distinct advantage of wider experience and knowledge of industry best practices. It's a really delicate balancing act the organization has to get right to properly support its managers.
Let's move to the final piece of the puzzle. Part 4, Navigating and Leading Change, the Indispensable Hero.
Despite all the structural hurdles and shifting responsibilities we've talked about, the middle manager remains the absolute linchpin of corporate strategy, which brings us to a massive, bold warning directly from the source texts. Top managers have to recognize the crucial influence middle managers have on the day-to-day performance and behavior of the staff. The implication for executives is crystal clear. Do not bypass middle managers in the strategy development process. If you ignore the people in the middle, your grand strategic changes will never ever stick with the people on the front lines. They are the translators of your strategy.
So I want to leave you with this final thought to chew on. Take a really hard look at your own workplace. Are you simply piling new HR and strategic duties onto your line managers while keeping them trapped in an outdated, restrictive hierarchy? Or are you actively transferring authority, adapting your structures, and actually giving them the tools they need to succeed? Is your organization structure holding your managers back or propelling them forward? Because honestly, that is the ultimate test of a modern organization.
Today, we're popping the hood on a business to look at the fundamental DNA of organizational design. If you've ever stared at a corporate org chart and wondered why on earth it's built the way it is, well, you're actually looking at the visible architecture of a company's entire strategy. So we're going to dissect one of the most common frameworks out there, the functional structure. Let's dive right in by asking the core question that pretty much every growing company eventually has to face. As a business expands its talent pool, how do you organize all those people to maximize their specialized expertise without accidentally trapping them inside isolated, uncommunicative silos? It's a massive balancing act between focused efficiency and company-wide collaboration. To figure that out, we're going to define the functional structure, weigh its pros and cons, and then look at a real-world case study from Electrolux. Okay, part 1, defining the functional structure. At its most basic level, a functional structure simply groups people together based on the primary core activities they perform for the company. Think about all the essential tasks required to keep the lights on and the product moving. This structure turns those specific tasks into distinct departments. You've definitely seen this before. It's that classic setup where distinct pillars, like manufacturing, marketing, and finance, all operate under central leadership, like a CEO. Everyone with a similar skill set is grouped right there together. And within those pillars, you'll find the standard departments that drive the business forward every single day. You have your production folks making the product, finance tracking the money, marketing selling the vision, HR managing the talent, and R&D building the future. But here's the catch. Understanding when to use this setup is absolutely key. Our source material highlights that this structure is usually found in smaller companies, or at least those with narrow, super focused product ranges rather than wildly diverse ones. When your business model is straightforward, grouping by function just makes perfect logical sense. Let's move right along to part 2 and see how this builds into some massive operational advantages. By centralizing authority at the top, senior managers gain incredible operational control. They get to have direct, hands-on involvement. Plus, because roles and tasks are so clearly defined, accountability shoots way up. There's really no confusion about who is supposed to be doing what, and that allows for highly centralized, rapid decision-making at the executive level. They're making incredibly efficient use of their managerial and technical talent. And honestly, one of the biggest wins here is the concentration of expertise. When you stick all your marketing folks in one room or one department, they learn from each other. It acts as an incubator for deep knowledge development in their specific functional specialism. They get remarkably good at what they do,
even if it means they start speaking in marketing acronyms the rest of the company totally doesn't understand. But of course, there's a flip side. Part 3, the disadvantages and the dreaded silos. As an organization scales up, or as its product lines and geographical reach become more diverse, this once efficient structure begins to show some severe cracks. The tension lies right here. In an ideal world, centralizing decision-making means top executives can survey the whole battlefield and make high-level strategic choices. In reality, in a fast-moving world, functional conflicts just get pushed straight up the chain of command. Senior managers become completely overburdened with routine operations and narrow disputes, making it incredibly hard to take a strategic view of the organization as a whole. And down on the lower levels, departments start to get tunnel vision. This creates what we call functional silos. Basically, departments put their blinders on and become inward-looking. The finance team only worries about the budget. The marketing team only worries about the ad spend. It becomes painfully difficult to integrate the knowledge of different functional specialists to actually solve complex, company-wide problems. The cost of these silos is frankly pretty huge. The whole organization becomes highly inflexible. It's hard to manage a coordinated, quick response to market changes, and line staff conflicts start popping up everywhere. It's also notoriously bad at coping with geographical diversity. For instance, imagine a central marketing silo trying to force a single, uniform advertising approach worldwide, completely ignoring the diverse needs of different regional markets. It's a recipe for disaster. So, how do you actually leverage this structure to solve problems instead of creating them? Let's look at Part 4, our real-world case study on Electrolux. Let's talk about Electrolux Home Products Europe, the Swedish multinational making consumer durables like cookers and fridges. For decades, they grew to dominance through acquisitions, which left them with a scattered, geographically based organizational structure. But by January 2001, the European market was fiercely competitive. Electrolux needed to capitalize on its massive size to reduce costs and improve product standards. Their bold solution? They completely abandoned that messy geographic structure in favor of a massive, Europe-wide functional structure. As Electrolux management noted at the time, the entire goal of this realignment was to ensure profitable growth by driving absolute simplicity into their business. They specifically wanted to reduce the number of organizational handoffs. You know, those tricky moments where a project gets tossed from one silo to another and the ball inevitably gets dropped in the process. Right, so here is their new blueprint. They boiled their massive European operation down to 4 highly focused functional departments. First, a combined purchasing, production, and product development arm to create a seamless flow from raw suppliers to finished, innovative products. Second, supply chain and logistics to link factory production right to sales forecasts. Third, a brand management division handling marketing, key accounts, and spare parts. And finally, sales clusters, which were grouped geographically into 7 clusters to actually sell the goods. But here is the stroke of genius in their redesign. By strictly defining those first 3 divisions, manufacturing, logistics, and branding as cost centers, and the sales clusters entirely as revenue drivers, Electrolux created crystal clear accountability. Everyone knew exactly what their function was and exactly how they were being measured. They used the functional structure to force simplicity onto a really complex system. Ultimately, the Electrolux case proves that structure must follow strategy. The functional structure isn't inherently good or bad. It's a tool. It can incubate incredible expertise and streamline operations, or it can fracture a company into uncommunicative silos. Which leaves us with one vital question to consider about the organizations we work in today. Is your company's structure driving simplicity and expertise, or are you just operating inside a beautifully designed silo? Have you ever looked at a massive global corporation and wondered, how on earth they keep the whole shebang running without it just collapsing like a giant house of cards? Well, you are in exactly the right place. Today, we're decoding an absolutely crucial piece of organizational design, the multi-divisional structure. Here's our roadmap for today. We'll be defining the structure, looking at the advantages of divisions, exploring what happens when divisions actually divide, and finally, unpacking the role of subdivisions. Okay, Section 1. Let's get right into defining the multi-divisional structure. So, divisionalization is essentially a direct attempt to conquer the sheer diversity of products or markets that a basic functional structure just can't handle. Think about it. When a company starts selling totally different products or spreading across the globe, a single central marketing department suddenly struggles to handle all these wildly diverse things. It's just too much. The multi-divisional structure fixes this by breaking the company up into separate, self-contained units based on specific products, services, or geographical areas. You actually see this all the time in public services too, where the organization is structured around totally different service departments like recreation, social services, and education. Now, take a look at how this actually plays out. Underneath the corporate headquarters, you've got Division A and Division B. And underneath each of those, they have their very own dedicated functional departments. Marketing, operations, personnel, they are entirely duplicated inside each division. Why does this matter? Well, it means each division can respond incredibly fast to the specific requirements of its own unique product or market strategy. They don't have to wait for a centralized headquarters to figure it out for them. It's like giving each division its own dedicated toolkit to win in its specific arena.
Moving on to Section 2, let's talk about the advantages of divisions. The operational advantages here are frankly huge. First up is flexibility. Organizations can simply add, close, or merge entire divisions as circumstances change, all without blowing up the whole corporate ecosystem. And because these are self-standing business units, headquarters can control them from a distance just by monitoring their business performance. Plus, you get the incredible benefits of specialization. A division can build laser-focused competence on a particular product group, a specific technology, or a distinct customer base. And because everyone in that division is aligned on the exact same goals, it drastically minimizes those frustrating conflicts that usually pop up across functional areas. Everyone is rowing in the same direction. But it's not just about day-to-day operations. There's a massive human capital benefit too. Giving a manager personal ownership of a whole self-standing business unit is literally the ultimate training ground. They have to balance the books, drive the strategy, manage the people, the whole 9 yards. It forces them to take a truly strategic view, which is exactly the kind of prep work required for managers who are expecting to go on to a main board position later in their careers.
All right, Section 3. This is where things get tricky, when divisions actually divide.
This brings us to a really stark realization. When you build self-contained silos, you often accidentally destroy collaboration. As the saying goes, divisionalization tends to get in the way of cooperation and knowledge sharing between business units. Divisions can quite literally divide. Expertise becomes completely fragmented. After all, divisional performance targets provide pretty poor incentives to collaborate with other divisions, right? Parts of the same company can start acting like fierce competitors. You might even start seeing glaring differences in image and quality across different divisions. And worse, managers might start focusing entirely on short-term performance just to dominate the organization-wide metrics.
And this highlights the central paradox of the whole thing. Divisions can become so entirely self-sufficient that they are de facto independent businesses. But here's the catch. You end up duplicating the functions and the costs of the corporate center across the company. You are paying for the exact same jobs multiple times. When this gets too extreme, executives often look at the math and realize it makes more sense to just split the company into independent businesses entirely. Actually, corporate demergers of exactly this type have been incredibly common for that very reason.
There's another major threat here too, losing control entirely. If divisions become too autonomous, especially in cases where joint ventures and partnerships dilute ownership, the whole multi-divisional structure can degenerate into a mere holding company. The corporate center effectively just holds the various businesses in a largely financial sense. They exercise very little actual control, and perhaps most importantly, they add very little value. It's a really dangerous spot for a parent company to be in.
Finally, Section 4. Let's look at the role of subdivisions.
So how do the absolute largest, most complex companies manage these intense, contradictory pressures? The answer usually lies in adding a second tier of subdivisions within their main divisions. By treating smaller strategic business units as subdivisions, it drastically reduces the number of units that the corporate center has to deal with directly. It keeps headquarters from drowning in the details. But more than that, it helps complex organizations respond to totally contradictory pressures. For example, a company could have massive global product divisions to keep their product strategy unified worldwide, but within those, they create geographical subdivisions to make sure they're still responding to local market nuances. It's a brilliant balancing act.
As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a question to help evaluate things in the real world. Does your company's structure actually conquer the diversity of your market, or does it just divide your internal expertise? It's a fine line between empowering, agile, focused units and just creating duplicate costs that kill collaboration. Understanding where an organization falls on that spectrum is absolutely key to its future success. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive.